Thanks for joining, everyone. Today I want to talk a little bit about team enablement. You may have heard about it also as dev experience, developer experience. And I want to talk about how it might be your journey to efficient engineering teams and improving the efficiency of your business. So, who are we? So, hi, I'm Ben. I'm a tech leader at Novoda. I've been working with Novoda for over 10 years now. Here in the crowd, we have Sarah, our new director of engineering, has been joining us last year. She'll be running a workshop following my talk. We're going to be trying to deep dive with you on some of those topics as well. Novoda, for those who don't know us, we are a mobile consultancy company. We help forward-thinking engineering leaders to just do the best work that they can at scale. So we've worked with many different companies from small to large. We're going to try and have a bit of fun today. What does it mean, team enablement? What does it mean, developer experience? And more importantly, why does it matter to you? Let's have a bit of show of hand. Who here is in a engineering department for mobile that is less than 10 people? Engineering department in mobile that is less than 20 people? More than 20 people? Oh, that's quite a few people. So you might be wondering, why does that matter to me? Obviously, yes, if you're a team of more than 20, you're probably going to have seeing like much larger impact when you talk about the efficiency of your development teams. But I think a lot of those concepts still apply from the very early stages. And I think that we can all take something away. And I'm going to try and have a discussion and understand where it can apply, what does it mean for you at every different sizes. We're going to be looking at it from a more engineering focused, a bit tech side of things. It's a very large subject, so I can't cover everything, but I wanted to give you a few examples of stuff that you might see in your day-to-day, or that you might look at tomorrow and see, oh, maybe we can apply that. So when we talk about efficiency, one of the key ways that you can improve the efficiency and the experience of your development team is to focus on the feedback cycles. There are three main feedback cycles that your engineers are going to work day-to-day with. The first one is the local workflow. That's you work on your machine, you write some code, press a button either to run some tests, either to run it on your phone, run it on your website, whatever it is, validate. You're going to be running through that a lot. This is something you run dozens, 20 times, 30 times a day. That's kind of your main loop. The next one is a pull request process. This is where you're happy with your code, you've got your piece of feature done, send it through, go through validation, run the test, run the linter, run all the things, get some feedback back and forth with your engineers, and then you go through that cycle a couple of times, validate your process, go through. And finally, you have the release cycle. That's the largest one, and that's the one that has the most impact overall in the life cycle of your product. And this is from starting to writing a piece of code to out there, it's in the user's hand. So let's have a look at the first one. That's the local one. That's the one you do very often. So let's imagine that you're working on your team. You've been working on the project for a little while, and maybe you haven't looked at your build time or how long that process takes. And one of the things to remember in a lot of the things we're going to be covering today is that if you're not putting work, if you're not actively working on a lot of those things, you're not staying at the same level. You're getting worse. As projects grow, build time grows, complexity grows. And so let's take a very, very small amount of improvement. Your normal kind of build time, you probably should try and keep it at like 3 or 4 minutes. That would be best, less if you can. Let's say you can save 1 minute on your build time. Just a single minute. How many times are you running through that cycle a day? Said probably 20, 30 times a day. Let's imagine you have 20 engineers in your team. What's that impact? That's 600 hours. That's 10 hours worth of time. That's like more than one person's full-time job that you've just saved. So obviously in here, 20 teams, like it's pretty large. What does that mean if you're smaller? Well, if you're smaller, yeah, you might not want to obsess over the build time all the time because your impact is a little, but even if you have 10 people to get the same impact as what, 2-minute time save? yeah, you might not look at it every month, but maybe you should at least once a year do an overhaul and try and improve. So what I'm trying to get at is a lot of those things, you might want to look at it more frequently. You need to be a little bit more aggressive in the maintenance that you do to keep the efficiency of your teams up when you're larger. But even when you're small, you want to keep those at the forefront of your mind. You want to make sure that you don't forget about them because it can have a very large impact. And if you need to get some buy-in, right? If you need to get your managers to say, yeah, we should maybe spend a little bit of time on that. Numbers speak. I mean, if you're talking here about saving one person's full-time job, that's expensive, right? I mean, engineers are expensive people. So if you can save one full person's job a day, that's worth spending some effort. Let's have a look at the pull request process. It's a lot larger. I mean, in here I'm taking numbers from an actual client that we've worked with, by the way. 2 years legacy code base. We had pull request time of over an hour. That's not just the build, obviously. You're validating multiple flavors. You're running UI test, unit test, running a bunch of validations. So we spent, I think, about a month and a half of effort. Saved 30 minutes on the build time. An average of 2 PRs a day per developer. I think that's fair, right? That's probably close to what people are trying to achieve at least. Team of 20 engineer, what are we at? 1,200 minutes, 20 hours of time save, that's 2.5 people. Once again, that was 2 people working for maybe a month, month and a half. Well, you've paid that investment back pretty quickly. Pull request process is probably, if you're in a small team, the thing that you might not like the most. And it's because, yeah, you might not always have the time to have a look at it and improve it. And as your project becomes older and older, and the complexity grows and grows, it gets longer and longer. So we need to make sure that we keep an eye on those things. And we've talked about the last one, the biggest cycle, release cycle. And this is the one where in mobile, we might not have the biggest focus on time and optimization. We're not like web and backend where, releasing 15 times a day is perfectly fine. If you release your app 15 times a day, your customers are going to hate you. But that doesn't mean that you can't improve things. There's a few things that we can have a look at. So first, how often? Like we just said, probably not 15 times a day. If you're like a fast-growing startup or a fast-growing business that needs fast feedback from your customers, getting up to 1 time a week might be a good idea. That really allows you to iterate really fast on your product, get fast feedback. But obviously, if you're smaller, that's way too much overhead. So the decision how often, that's more of a product plus engineering decision that you have to make together. You have to figure out what makes sense for us and then try and apply to it. There's a few things you can improve still. Is your release process repeatable? Is it reliable? Like when you're small, you might just have one person that does it by hand. That's fine. But then one day that person is sick. You can't release that day. That's a bit of a problem. That's something that we've seen happen. Or as you start growing, you might want to have more people being able to get in charge to avoid that, but you might not want to share the credentials to shipping your production app to everyone in your team. But ideally, you might want everyone in the team to be able to trigger it. And this is where starting to look at things like automation and scripting things might help. You can start thinking about having access credentials, service credentials, so that you can have a machine somewhere in the cloud that is allowed to do the release, that has a script that defines all your process, all your tests, everything. And then now anyone in a team can press a button and it happens. Or even better, can have it fully automated every week. Starts a release process, cuts off a build, sends it to beta, validates it. If no one presses the red button, pushes to the store, release. And now you have, no one needs to be involved in the release process. You don't even need to worry about it every week. The build comes out. Unless something goes wrong, then someone starts to intervene. So by focusing on automating things that are repeatable, and by allowing to decouple the release process out of the hands of the engineer, you now have the ability to have reliable, repeatable builds at a regular interval. So what can you automate? Well, first thing you've said, anything lengthy, but we've just said like release process isn't particularly lengthy, but it's quite frequent. You're going to do things. If you have a phase release process over a week, pretty much every single day of the week, something needs to happen. It might just be pressing a button to increase from 2% to 10% of your user base, but that's still a task that someone needs to do. And one of the key things is if you have to do a task, you context switching. It might only take you 5 minutes to do it, but then you need to get back to what you were doing before. And there's been an interesting study, but the cost of a context switch, do you know what it is on average for an engineer? 23 minutes. On average, if you're forced to context switch to get back into the mental model that you were in before, it's 23 minutes of time. So if you can avoid context switching for your engineers, it's best. And the last one, we just touched upon it, decoupling permissions, right? Avoid having single failure points in your release process. It shouldn't be that if someone went home a bit early or someone is ill that week that you can't release to the store, because that wouldn't be great. So how can you make sure you do the right thing? How do you make sure that you're moving in the right direction when you improve the efficiency of your team? Measure things. No, I'm not kidding. You should measure everything. And you might tell yourself, it's okay. It's dev stuff. I know it. I've been working in those teams. We do that every day. It's fine. But actually, the everyday bit can be a problem. Business as usual. We've all heard that term. It's how it is. That's how we do things. I'm going to give you a little anecdote of something, but I once interviewed a team. We're trying to understand how they work, and we were asking, what's your day-to-day like? How do you work? What are your main pain points? Are there anything that is causing you friction as you work? And we start focusing on, what about your feedback cycle? What about your pull request process? Is everything going fine? Everything is, yeah, it's fine, it's fine. It took us 40 minutes of interview to get them to tell us that half of the time, 50% of the time, the PR on the CI is failing. They need to press a button to rerun it. The answer? This is fine. This is just normal. Obviously it's not. 50% of the time. That's just so much wasted potential. But they didn't realize it because for them, that was just how it is. We've been doing that for years. It's fine. So we need to measure your impact. You cannot have an understanding of how you're progressing in improving your team's efficiency and their workflow if you do not measure things. And you don't have to, invent new things. For some of the stuff we've discussed today, CI and CD, there's some pretty good existing metrics. You may have heard of DORA. No, not this one. This one, the DevOps Research Assessment Metrics. So this is a research group by Google that has done some very good thinking on DevOps and on what type of metrics are important to monitor to understand how healthy your delivery pipeline is. And we're talking about mobile. They're not always applicable, but there's been some interesting talks. This is a very good blog post that was written called How to Apply DORA Metrics for Mobile Development. This is from a client of ours, and it's good at explaining this idea of what are the few things you might need to tweak when it comes to discussing mobile when you want to implement DORA metrics for your pipeline. And lastly, you know your team the best. You know your process, you know your people. Talk to them. Try and understand, like we said, what are your pain points? What are the things that block you? And then you can come up with the right metrics to measure. It might be that, actually, the flow of our ticket is pretty complicated, and we may have been a bit of back and forth between product and engineering a few times. Maybe you just need to measure how many times it happens, and then see, do I need to action that? Do I need to change it? There's many things that revolve around how your engineers and how your staff is working on a daily basis. So feel free to write up your own, whatever you need to measure to make sure that you can understand how well you're working. And finally, I want to talk a bit about how you can implement that. What are the few things you need to make sure that you do progress in the right direction? You need to make sure that you have some people that are autonomous, that are able to make decisions on starting to implement some of those actions. Someone that can make the call on, we need to spend some time on CI, or we need to spend some time on ensuring we have a good ownership process. We've only covered a little bit of this today, but there's a lot that comes into it. So making sure people can make decisions is important. The second one is you need accountability. You need to make sure that there is a way that you measure your output and that there's expected results on it. And this is where it usually is something we've recommended is starting to create a team dedicated around it. It can be part of the platform team, for example, as some of the responsibilities that is added on it. But the problem is if you try and do that within your existing product teams, the accountability part tends to disappear because your productivity is going to be how well am I delivering at a product level? And that's not really compatible with some of the concerns that we've shown here. And actually, it's a product. Your team efficiency is a service that you're providing to customers. Your customers is just the engineers within your teams. So if you have a dedicated team, you can apply the existing processes that you have. You can just say, let's use the same setup that we have for our product teams, but just we apply it internally. We have a product owner, someone that can drive features, stories, arc of efforts. It could be that one of the features that that team starts working on is implementing the risk process that was just presented before. That would be a way you can improve the efficiency of your team. So there's different things, and having the ability to drive that as a product is what is going to enable you to not just apply a few stopgap solutions, but continuously assess, continuously evaluate where are you, where do you want to go. Similarly, run user surveys the same way you would do for your product. Normally you would try and get feedback from your customers. Well, in here, your customers are your engineers. Run interviews with them, run surveys, try and get a feedback for how things are going, what are the things that are blocking them, and then make decisions and move forward. If you have autonomy, accountability, and you apply your product mindset, you can really transform completely how your business operates and make sure that your engineers remain efficient. So this was just a small example. I hope that you've understood a little bit the concepts behind developer experience and team enablement. I hope that you may have already some ideas on how you might want to do things in the future. If you're interested in reading more, this is a blog post on the topic that we've published where we cover a few other topics that we may not have covered tonight. Things like ownership and accountability in maintenance of code, things like that. And this is only the first blog post in a big series that we're going to be doing. We're going to be continuing to post updates covering many topics such as continuous deployment, organizational communication, continuous improvement, how all of those things are essential in making your business efficient. So if you want to keep up to date, Twitter Novoda, LinkedIn Novoda, we'll always post over there when we put some of the updates. And we're also always interested in having interesting chats with people that have experience in the industry. So if you want to talk with us, feel free to reach out to us. Do you have any questions?
Hello. Great talk. Great selection of gifts also. Great selection of gifts. Gifts in... never mind.
Cheers.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask, so in your interviews with companies that you did, have you come across any that do pair programming or mob programming? And how do these affect these numbers?
Yeah, I mean, pair programming is actually quite common in a lot of the companies we've worked with. Maybe not all the time, but usually on more complex topic, it's quite important to pair. It doesn't usually impact too much the flow of working. In terms of setup, it might mean that you need a little bit of help from a tooling perspective, maybe, if you have like a remote setup to ensure that you have a good remote pairing experience. So that's how some of that can come into it. But yeah, in practice, whatever your team is doing, if you have specific flows or specific things, it's good to try and understand how they're working and then maybe what's blocking them, what could be improved, things like that.
Hi there. The question is, how do you get a developer or a team of developers to recognize that they're not seeing the wood for the trees when it comes to like noticing that their build is taking 10 minutes and it really shouldn't, when that's always been the case? And you know, what can you do to get them to notice things?
That's a really good question, because it is a tough problem. I mean, it comes from a few things. It can come from like having a few people who have enough experience from other companies and other things, which is usually where we come in. We've worked in loads of different companies, so we can bring some of that expertise of saying, here's what we've seen out there, so that can help spark a few questions earlier on. But the other aspect is what I've mentioned about measuring, right? If you have the right metrics, then you can start seeing like, okay, here's all those. And then if you know which metrics impact the most the flow, let's say we're talking about it's always been a 10-minute build. Well, you know, local build is like has a huge impact. So then you might, even if it's always been the case, you might start asking yourself, can we do better? Then you can test it. If you have the measurements, you can measure the impact, and then you can go from there. So as long as you measure the right things, then you're able to try things out, experiment, and iterate the same way you would do with your product.
I appreciate this a large topic, as you said. I was wondering if you consider the nature of the feedback. So you talked about the feedback loops at the different levels, local, pull request, and release. But what about the nature of the feedback itself? So, for example, the stuff that you'd find out during the release process or after you've released is very, very valuable, but ideally you would find it out much, much sooner. So how does that play into what you advise people to?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where, you know, having that idea of like iterating on a product as a service is, right? If you realize that there are things that you need to, like you would like to have earlier in that process, then you can start saying, do I have any ways of bringing that early on? For release process, like what we've seen doing is like having, when you have a release train, like of let's say every week or so, is like having an internal beta or things like that to try and get like internal buy-in from people in the company, test that, get that feedback early on. But then it might be that you have other things going on. Like we've had a case where there was a fairly high rate of hotfixes, a fairly high rate of like recalls, and so start having an investigation of like what's going on there. Is it that you have actually crash rates happening, or is it something else? What we realized that actually is the issue was it was a hijack by product owners, that they were just using the hotfix for like, oh, we've just missed this release window. Let's just like hotfix this needs absolutely to be here right now. And so one of the ways that we fix that was by release more often. Then, you know, if you release every week, is it really a big deal if you've missed the release window that was yesterday? You just wait a little bit longer and your feature is out as well. And that can help de-stress, because it goes back to the context switching, like doing a hotfix is highly disruptive for loads of people in the team, whereas just the normal release is fully automated and doesn't need to have any input. So that helps kind of reduce the stress level and improve the efficiency of everybody. Question over there.
Might need to pass it up.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, the other loop may be important to mention regarding testing environments. Like I've noticed sometimes that it's a bit stressful to try to test some features. You need to go to production because the development environment is broken and things like that, and that really impacts the development generally. Do you coach on that or help people on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a case where having a team of people that can focus on deep, complex problem really pays off. So we're talking about development environment, right? If the only way to test some things is to go in production, that's not really good. That's going to slow you down a lot. So then you need to have a look. It's like, why is it the case? Is there anything that we can do? Can we have a test environment? If not, why? Is there any blockers that we can work to reduce? And this is where having people that have that autonomy of working on those topics really shines, because someone that is just working within a product team would not be able to tackle on something that big, because this would probably take quite a while. But if you have a team that can drive this, they might be able to map out. It might take you 6 months to sort that out. It might take you a full year. But like you said, this might have a huge impact. So then you can actually say, we do need that. And yes, we're going to have 5 people working on this for an entire year. but then we know that later on that is going to speed us up. So it's a cost efficiency analysis, and if you have the ability to plan work ahead and to estimate things like that, then you can start tackling on those larger challenges, basically, like you've defined. Anyone else? Well, thank you very much.